Hi, I hope you're enjoying the Masterbooks Curriculum Summit. I am Jessica McCullough. I'm a part of the marketing team here at Masterbooks, and I'm the social media manager. Today, I am joined by Carrie Lindquist. She is the author of Foundations Phonics and the Let's Talk Science series. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you.
Will you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, my name's Carrie Lindquist, and I'm the author of Foundations Phonics and Let's Talk Science. And I'm actually a homeschool graduate myself, so I was homeschooled from 1st through 12th grade. During my mid to late teen years, I also had the opportunity of working at a homeschool distributor, so I worked in their warehouse, and I also did customer support, helping moms find the best curriculum for them, coaching them through those first few initial steps. And so that was a lot of fun, and that experience was really invaluable. From there, I went to Liberty University online for education and then married my husband, Wayne. We have 2 boys currently, and we're expecting our 3rd boy in November.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Can you share the heart behind Foundations Phonics? What need did you see in the homeschool market before writing this course?
Yeah, so like I said, I was homeschooled from 1st through 12th grade, and I have really great memories of sitting on the couch with my mom and her teaching me how to read. And those memories and those jingles have just stuck with me through my whole life. And so once my kids started to hit that learning to read stage, I started listening to my peer group, and I was hearing a lot of, oh, I would love to homeschool, but teaching reading, like that's just not, I can't do that. It's very complicated. It takes up too much time. I don't have the energy for it. And so I started thinking about how to resolve those pain points. And if there was a course that was a little bit easier to implement, easier to use, easy on mom, if that would give moms the opportunity to develop those memories with their own kids. There's nothing like watching your kid's face just absolutely light up as they're learning those new concepts and sharing those memories with your kids. So that was kind of the inspiration behind the course. And then the heart was, as I was thinking and brainstorming through it, I started to think of what would it look like if it was a biblical foundation. And so all of those rhymes and jingles that we have as part of our family culture now, what would it look like if that had been a biblical foundation? And so as circumstances in life come up, you're drawing from the experience that you learned in the Learning to Read program. And so that is where the biblical foundation component of it came in as really the heart.
Great. I love that part of it. And I love that Foundations Phonics teaches reading while going through the entire Bible and explaining the salvation message, because the gospel message is so important for us to share with our children. So how does the course merge these two things, the gospel and reading, in such a seamless way?
Right. So the Bible is really the heart of the course. And so as the student is learning how to read, they're also tracing the salvation message through the Bible from creation to the resurrection of Christ. And so as each letter is introduced, it's tied to a biblical character or a phrase or a lesson that we draw from the Bible. And so it begins with creation, and it introduces the letter N. N is for nothing, none, not even a bit, but it wasn't for long because God started creating. And so that becomes their starting point. And then as each letter is introduced, it builds on the foundation laid in the other messages all the way up through. So they're getting a good understanding of creation and the fall and why there's sin and how it affects us and why Jesus had to come and all of these characters through the Bible that played an important role. And so that's building their foundation as they're learning how to read in it all.
Yes, I've had the opportunity to use Foundations Phonics with one of my children, and I'm actually going through it now with a second child. And I just love that so much. I love that we are able to bring in the Bible with reading. They're not, we don't have to separate them. And while they're learning to read, they're really deepening their faith. Or for some students, that's kind of their first step of faith. Foundations Phonics, we have a lot of testimonies of students, surrendering to Christ. Sorry, trying to come up with the words there. Surrendering to Christ when they realize going through Foundations Phonics, oh, I have sinned and I do need him. So that's a beautiful thing.
And I love that it gives some launching points into bigger conversations too, because these are also the ages that they're encountering the consequences of sin in their lives. One of my sons, they came across a fledgling in our yard that had died, and that became the launching point of, well, sin separates us from God. It's a very sad thing, and the consequences are always sad. But because they'd already had that foundation, then it makes the conversations easier.
Absolutely. So what age do you recommend beginning Foundations Phonics? And do you recommend that anything precede it?
So Simply K is always a great starting point. That's going to lay a lot of the foundation work. Typically, you're looking at about the ages of 5 to 7, but that's going to vary by student because some students they're naturally ready to learn reading a lot earlier, and some are going to be a little later, and both are perfectly okay. So that is looking at roughly the kindergarten to first grade age. And more so than the age, you're looking for some markers that are going to indicate to you that your student is ready. Because if they're not ready, then it's going to just be a painful process. So the first is you want to see that the student has some motivation for learning to read, because we all know with young kids, if there's no motivation, there's not a lot of point in trying. You also want to see that they recognize that letters and words on a page have a meaning, so that it's not just something that's there to them. They recognize that there's information that's being conveyed, and they have an interest in what that information is. A basic recognition of letters and sounds, which Simply K is going to go through and do that really, really well. They don't need to have an extensive foundation, but to know that the letter B, this is what it looks like, this is uppercase, lowercase, and this is the sound that it makes. So that's kind of what you're looking for. And that's letting you know that their memory is in place to remember those things as they then start reading. Another important one is that you can tell them a story and they can relate to it and identify and tell it back in their own words. And so that's an indication that they're processing the information that they're going to need for reading. And then you want to see, can they discern individual sounds? So do they hear like the word cat as one word, or can they also recognize that there's 3 distinct sounds making that up? So that's going to be important for their memory and developing their skills as they're learning to read.
Okay, great. Once beginning the course, how quickly will students begin blending and actually reading words?
Yeah, so that was something important to me, because I think once you have that motivation and they're excited, you want to capitalize on that. And so the first week they introduce 3 letters, and then by lesson 4, they're blending and they'll be reading from there. And so they're very simple words, obviously, but it's enough to give the student that initial rush of, I just did something and it's really cool and I want to keep learning.
Absolutely. Those quick wins are so great to keep encouraging the student.
Yes.
So what does a day in the course look like? What's expected of the parent? About how much time does it take?
Yeah, so another thing that was really important to me in the course was, at this stage, a lot of us, we have infants, or you're homeschooling younger and older students at the same time. There's so many moms that are working either from home or outside of the home. And so I wanted it to be very, very easy to manage. So it's designed to be a 3-day-a-week course. And so that can fit into however your week is going. And it's also very flexible. So if your student is just flying through the course, you can go through it much faster. If you need to go through it slower, you can also do that. It's about 20 minutes a day. And so the lesson flow would start with the lesson narrative. So that's the story portion of the lesson. It's introducing the letter or the concepts for the week. And that narrative is designed to take about 5 to 10 minutes. So it's really fast and easy. There are breaks usually in the narrative to give your student an opportunity to reply or do something physical, because my kids don't sit still very long. So I wanted there to be some opportunity for activity there. From there, once the student is reading, there's a little section of reading practice, and you can break up that lesson however works. So if your student has a very, very short attention span, you can do the narrative, come back later and do the reading. And then there's also a worksheet with activities for fine motor skills, practicing writing, coloring, that kind of stuff. And so you can also do those at a separate point in the day. Or some students, if your student is learning how to read on the earlier side, they don't always have the hand-eye coordination to be able to do the writing. And so you can always save those worksheets to do later on too, once they're ready for those. And then there's a wealth of extra bonus activities in the course. And so if you have the extra time during the day and you want to have a hands-on activity with your student, you can. If it's been a really busy day, they're not integral to the course. And so some of them are just, they all use materials that you're going to have at home, like flour, sugar, sticky tabs, those kind of things. And you can just look at the activity and pretty much go do it. And so you might draw letters on sticky tabs and put them on the floor and have your call out a letter and have them jump. Others are going to be attached to the lesson. So for sin, for example, as we introduce the concept of sin, one of the activities is to give them a clean white sheet of paper and then paint their hands and have them touch it and then tell them to remove the paint from the paper. And it illustrates that once sin entered creation, there was no way for us to remove that and to correct it. And that helps illustrate why we then needed a savior.
Great. So when students have completed Foundations Phonics successfully, what would they be ready to move into at that point?
Right. So Language Lessons for Living Education 1 would be the course that was specifically written to follow up Foundations Phonics. And that is also designed to be really flexible. So if your student completed Foundations Phonics during the kindergarten year, you could use Language Lessons for Living Education Level 1 for the first grade year. If they were ready at the beginning of first grade to complete Foundations Phonics and you do that in a half year, then you can do Language Lessons 1 for the second half of the first grade year. So that's how that would pan out.
Okay, great. So you have not just authored Foundations Phonics, but you are also the author of the Let's Talk Science series. So we're going to kind of do a similar question that we did with Foundations Phonics. Why did you decide to write the Let's Talk Science series? What sets this series apart from other elementary science programs?
Yeah, so my boys were definitely the reason I decided to write Let's Talk Science. They started to hit that kindergarten, first grade level, and they had huge questions all the time. So we'd be outside and they'd just be spouting off all these science questions. And for me, science was never my favorite subject in school. So I was like, I have no idea. Let's go find the answer. And so we'd sit down and we'd start researching either books or on the internet, and we'd find the answer to their question, and then we talk about the spiritual lessons also behind that. And so what do we see? What does this illustrate to us? You know, is this an effect of sin on the world? And so we started having those conversations. And so at the time, I was also working full-time from home. And so I felt like I wanted a hands-on program, but I also needed it to be very easy to manage and inexpensive. And so that is kind of how Let's Talk Science came to be. As far as what sets it apart, again, it's very easy to manage. And it's hands-on, but it's important to me that hands-on means inexpensive and easy. I can pick up most of the supplies out when I'm grocery shopping and not have to worry about it. I'm not always super planned out when it comes to our homeschool days. And so I love that grab and go feature where if it's been a busy week, I can still grab and go. And it gives an opportunity like Foundations Phonics to have a lot of those bigger conversations, because you never know what they're thinking and what questions they have. And so it opens up that space for dialogue where we can begin helping them develop their own worldview and learn to recognize worldviews. And then I think when it all boils down, everything that we see in science is an illustration to us. It shows or teaches us more about God and his character and our relationship with him.
Great. So how does Let's Talk Science integrate that biblical truth along with the scientific concepts?
Yeah, so one of my favorite verses is in Romans 1:20, and it says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." And in Let's Talk Science, it will introduce the topic. So in Adventures in the Physical World 1 week, they're learning about thermal energy. And so that's a really big topic. Well, thermal and heat energy is also used to purify things. We can purify gold, for instance. And that leads us back to 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to purify us and forgive us from all unrighteousness. And so these things that we're studying, they lead back to the truth that we find in Scripture, and they remind us of those things. And so that is how a lot of it will be linked up. And even one of the things I love studying in writing Adventures on Planet Earth, that one covers a lot of the ecology topics. And one hard topic is the food chain, because Nobody enjoys the food chain. But in that, there is such incredible wisdom from our creator that he not only designed a world to function perfectly, but he also put in the material that the creation would need to also function in an imperfect state. And how much mercy is there that the food chain keeps creation in balance. You know, without it, things would be all out of whack. How much wisdom and mercy do we see in God's creation? And so that is something that I love about studying science in this way, that we get to see so much of God's character. And it's also training the students so that as they progress through higher levels of science, they're learning to look for God's design, so that when you see something that's amazing, you go, oh my goodness, God is so amazing. And it draws you to just worship him.
Yes, I agree. It's such a beautiful part of the course. So currently, levels 1, 2, and 3 are out.
Yes.
Level K is releasing very soon.
Yes.
So can you give us a little bit of information on what Let's Talk Science Level K it covers?
Yes, I've been looking at the design proofs for Let's Talk Science K, and it is coming together so beautifully. It is so cute. I can't wait to share it. So Level K is going to follow the adventures of Gideon and his teddy bear, Mr. Snuggly, as they explore the world around them through science. And so in it, it's going to lay the foundation for moving through the additional levels of Let's Talk Science. So they're going to learn that God is their creator, and that's going to be really the foundation of it all. They discover the tools that we use in science, relying very heavily on their 5 senses and learning how we use our 5 senses to explore creation around us. Some of the topics are light and shadows, color, size, shape, water, heat, living things, non-living things, habitats. How do we care for God's creation, weather, seasons, day and night, minerals, fossils, dinosaurs. There's a whole lot of topics in there. And there's a lot of hands-on activities and crafts. And again, those are all materials that you're going to have a lot of times in your kindergarten cabinet, or if you're out grocery shopping, you can pick up what you need to do the craft.
That's great. I love the range of topics, because just like you said earlier, with your boys asking you so many questions, you know, in those kindergarten ages, children are asking so many questions about a range of things. And so that, you know, having a little bit of each topic kind of helps get them more interested. And you can even start to see what really interests your child at that point.
Yes, I love opening up the world as you go through those questions.
Yes. So what does the day-to-day look like in each level? You kind of talked about the supplies before. So, but what does each day kind of look like?
Yeah, so kindergarten is a 2-day-a-week course, and those are going to be about 10 to 20-minute lessons once that one is released. For levels 1 and 2, those are a 3-day-a-week course, and the lessons follow a weekly pattern of, on the first day of lesson, they're going to learn about the topic. So it's the introduction to the topic. On the second day, they're going to experience the topic through an investigation, a hands-on activity, some sort of an experiment, and so those are always a lot of fun. And day 3, they share what they've learned with someone else. And so for those levels, you have a separate notebook, and the student will have a page that they'll complete and tear off, put into their notebook. We found when my sons were those ages, we put pages into a binder. And so at the end of the day, when Dad came home, they'd be like, Dad, look at what we learned. And they'd go through and tell him all about that. And so that was a highlight of their day. So we had incorporated that into levels 1 and 2 with the student's science notebook. Level 1 explores creation through the days of creation. So they'll look at day 1 and they're learning about day and night, and day 2, and it'll move through topics according to the days of creation. As they're learning those, they'll also be discovering some of the science topics in those days. And then level 2 is the physical world. So they're studying through the physical sciences. And so that one's also a lot of fun. Levels 3 and eventually level 4 take a little bit of a pivot in the format, because in these levels, the student is ready to begin learning for themselves in a lot of cases. And so the lessons are a little bit shorter, and it's a 5-day-a-week course. So on days 1 through 3, the student is learning the material. Day 4 usually provides the biblical or spiritual connection for the lesson. And then on day 5, they are sharing what they've learned. And the student notebook for those are a little bit different. So they'll do an art, find my camera here, they'll do an art page. And so they'll have something that they write for the lesson, and then a picture that they draw, and that's different for each week. And so at the end of the course, you have this really special science notebook memento that you can store for them, or they can save or do whatever they want with. So that is a lot of fun too.
That's great. So you did kind of mention this is just a second ago. There is one more level on the horizon before the series is complete. So
Yes.
will you give us a little bit of insider info? What is the planned topic for level 4?
Yeah, so level 4 is Adventures in the Scientific Method. So I'm writing this one right now, and I'm really excited about it. This one will wrap up the series and prep the students for further scientific study. And so they're going to expand what their definition of science is. It's going to introduce how to create their own lab reports. And so as they do experiments, they'll be compiling their lab reports and learning how that goes, and also exploring the methods that we use to study science and how those all work, how we can implement them in our day-to-day lives, that kind of thing. It's going to look a lot deeper at how worldview shapes the way that we understand science. And so at this stage, a lot of students are starting to see that there are two different worldviews that we see in science, and they're learning how to recognize and discern what information they can trust, what information maybe they need to question. And so it's going to be developing those skills of how do we discern the worldview in this material? How do we look at something in science and decide, what's a biblical foundation and what is not? So they're looking at those and answering big questions like, is science always truth? Those are big questions that they're starting to see in the world around them. And so there's a lot of foundational skills that are going to be developed in this lesson. And it's going to explore these topics while the student is covering some topics from biology and chemistry. So there's going to be a lot of fun in this course.
Awesome. I'm really excited to see this one and even to use it with my kids. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, Carrie.